Grace Dawes, editor of Movement, the urban transport publication for the Move events, and I'm the host of our On the Move podcast. Today I'm joined by Martyn and Marc from Aon. Can you both just introduce yourselves quickly for me and what you do here at Aon?
Sure. Hi, Grace. My name is Martyn Denney. I'm Head of Innovation and Investments at Aon in the UK. So in a snapshot, that means I'm very focused on the products and solutions that Aon delivers for our clients' needs and their future growth.
Yeah, hi Grace. I'm Marc Spurling, Director of Future Mobility Strategy at Aon. I sit in the Growth Ventures team of Aon, which is an innovation hub which focuses on future mobility. So that's all the exciting things that are going on across the mobility ecosystem, from new energy vehicles, electricity, hydrogen, autonomous vehicles, which is a super exciting area for us, and then sort of anything else that covers the sort of movement of goods or people, predominantly backed by apps or technology.
Great, well thank you so much for that introduction. And for this episode today, us three have come together to discuss how risk capital can unlock growth for mobility businesses. But before we dive into that, I was hoping that one of you could do me the honour of just telling me and the audience a bit about Aon as a company and what you do.
Sure, thanks Grace, I'll take that. So Aon is a global professional services firm that advises on all aspects of risk and human capital. So what does that mean? So it's the capital, it's the money that finances and transfers risks and plans for adverse outcomes, so typically in layman's terms insurance, and also the financial capital that the insurers and the reinsurers need for the huge risk exposures. So from a mobility perspective, that means our clients can range from traditional fleets to connected fleets through to micro-mobility, and then ultimately through to what we're looking at in terms of autonomous vehicles and drones for the future. We also help in the way people are utilised as an asset and how this can be optimised. We call this human capital. And again, in layman's terms, that's helping firms attract and retain talent. And lastly, we focus on how investment and money is distributed. So in terms of pensions, investments and wealth management.
Great. And is there anything you wanted to add to that, Marc?
I think what we see is the increased complexity and risk across those different client profiles. And I think Aon's power is its ability to bring those different aspects of need that clients have and be able to advise them. So we have worldwide expertise on that, and some of our expertise is very deep.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for outlining all of that for me from both of you. So Aon is attending Move this year as a Diamond sponsor. And I think the most logical thing to discuss now is how Aon fits into the Move event and the world of mobility. Can either of you answer that for me?
Yeah, sure, Grace. I'll pick that up initially. So firstly, we're delighted to be a Diamond sponsor of Move again. It's our second year being so. We got a huge amount of value out of last year's conference. It was really eye-opening and great to see the level of innovation that is actually out there globally in the mobility space. So what's Aon's role in mobility? So as Marc said in the previous answer, we view mobility in the widest sense in terms of the movement of goods and people. And we're really passionate that insurance gets viewed as an enabler for growth for companies at Move. And we want to try and drive a different conversation and get it viewed through a different lens, not just through a cost lens. So for us, insurance affects every business, every consumer. It's often forgotten but always present, and it's often a last minute decision. And we really want to change that narrative, that without being able to transfer risk effectively and allocate risk effectively and allocate capital effectively, a lot of the growth trajectory of many of the great ideas at the conference would be slowed down. So how do we bring this to life? So if you think about infrastructure, we need a lot more infrastructure built to enable what we want to achieve. And that you need insurance to build, you need insurance to create the roads, the systems to now enable people to take advantage of mobility safely. There's all the technology that comes because everybody will have an app on their phone. So you've got naturally the cyber risk, the business interruption if you can't access your app, the consumer protection to make sure your data is protected. And then ultimately, if something does go wrong, which is insurance's fault, the liability insurance to operate and protect your balance sheet. And there's been a quote that our Chief Exec, Greg Case, has mentioned a few times in the recent years, and I think it's really salient for this conversation, that from the 1970s through to the 1990s, insurance as a percentage of GDP spend increased, which meant it was really relevant and people were transferring risk to the industry since the 1990s, that percentage has dropped almost in every year, which means the percentage of insurable risks is falling. I think as an industry, we need to stay relevant, and mobility brings huge opportunities. It's the right thing to do for hundreds and hundreds of reasons, but we've got to make sure we're there driving the industry forward and making sure all the people at Move can be a success.
And I was going to add to that. I mean, I think, we know that sort of every business that's represented at Move, they're impacted in terms of their unit economics, in terms of how they can generate revenue, the impact on profitability. And insurance and risk can be a big cost that hits that bottom line. So for us, we're about how we can use our capability, our market coverage to bring new capital to support those businesses in terms of reducing those costs, deploying capital more effectively. And that's why we're super excited to be at Move again.
Great, thank you. So what it all boils down to of what you just said is, I think if not all of the companies attending Move need some form of insurance, and you're right. And Aon, as a professional services firm that advises on all aspects of risk and people, can you give me some examples of those risks that you take care of?
Yeah, well, I mean, we work with sort of micro mobility players, so e-bikes, e-scooters, dealing with sort of rider liabilities, thinking about the suitability of insurance programs, helping to educate, I guess, regulators in terms of how they think about the operation of that type of innovative mobility solution. We also work with sort of last mile delivery, rideshare, peer-to-peer companies. The unit economics for those businesses are super important to their profitability. Route operations are really critical to their success. Martyn, perhaps we can come on to how we help from, I guess, a pensions and investments side of things, and also health and human capital.
Yeah, sure, Marc. So I think from a health and human capital perspective, I think I'll take it down to the challenge that most companies have, which is attracting and retaining talent. Fundamentally, everyone at Move and in the room will be wanting data scientists and data engineers, and they're exactly the sort of people that the huge tech firms also want. So that war on talent impacts the mobility and therefore the success of the sector as well. So we really want to be able to help people attract the best people, whether that's through psychometric testing and helping people get the best people in the first place, through to retaining them and making sure that the benefits that people have are relevant through that company's life cycle as well, because again, it's very different from being a startup in one country to a global player across tens and tens of countries. To Marc's point around the sort of retirement and the wealth part of our business, one of the areas we think will see great change will be what the British government is talking about at the moment, is how do we start releasing some of the huge amounts of capital that are in pension funds at the moment in the UK to help start supporting the infrastructure build. And again, we're gonna have someone speaking about that at Move.
Yeah, great. And in reference to last year, in 2023 at Move, Gillian Slyfield, who I believe is your Chief Innovation Officer, is that correct? Yeah.
Right, yeah.
She issued a call to action to the audience to implore them to ask more of your broker and more of your insurer. And what I wanted to ask you two, what are the challenges that mobility businesses are still facing? She only said that last year, but a lot has changed in the last year. What are they still facing now?
Yeah, thanks, Grace. I'll pick that up. I mean, I think, firstly, Aon has been sort of held true to that promise, and it's been investing in this area to address some of the challenges, and we will continue to do so. So Curtis Scott, who is head of the Future Mobility and Digital Economy practice, will be delivering our keynote speech this year, and he's going to have some really exciting news on the real specifics that we've carried out in this space to address the challenges. I think broadly we see them in 4 areas. I think a lot has been done, but there's still more to be done. So broadly, we think that there needs to be more to help support the change away from traditional insurance products so that they're more innovative. Thinking about how we can make insurance and risk easier to navigate for clients. So the availability and use of data is a huge area that spans the whole of the mobility ecosystem. It's particularly important for autonomous vehicle businesses, but also impacts every aspect of tech-enabled businesses and mobility services. And it's a big area that Aon is focused on. And lastly, really, we want to think about ensuring we support new risk concepts so that insurance becomes much more portable, frictionless, and something that really works for customers and clients.
Yeah, great. So going back to just the beginning of what you just said, I know you mentioned moving away from traditional products. Can you just talk a little bit more about that and what you mean by traditional products as well?
Yeah, sure. I'll pick that up, Marc. So I think what we mean there is the mobility sector is innovative, it's pushing boundaries, it's bringing new solutions to consumers and to businesses alike. And what that means is that the sector is pushing for different solutions to meet their needs, which is great. However, insurance has traditionally been quite siloed in how both insurers and often brokers were structured themselves into different classes of insurance and different types of insurance. And that's not necessarily been very client friendly. So the siloed product approach doesn't really work for new operating models in the mobility sector. It can bring high administration burden, it's duplicative, and it can be quite costly. And I think that is really clearly identified in the gig and the sharing economy, where often the success of the business model is a platform where there may be hundreds of thousands, millions of customers, and you clearly cannot issue policies for every single consumer. So we need to start thinking about things in different ways. And that is much more about agile product development solutions and solutions that can become more bite-sized and consumable. And I think a call out for me here to kind of everyone that will be attending Move is about time. So the industry definitely wants to innovate. It's been doing it for hundreds of years. Otherwise we still wouldn't be around. But it's really beneficial when we have time. And that is about working in collaboration with firms to design products that fit their complex needs. And that helps us work in partnerships with clients, insurers to develop actual real solutions.
Yeah, and I think the best example of really where we do need to move away from those traditional products is probably in the space of autonomy. So I think it's generally recognised that the existing insurance products that are out there probably aren't going to work for large-scale deployment of autonomous technology. So there's an opportunity there, I think, for us to look forwards and create solutions that work. So insurance has traditionally been very reactive. Insurance solutions come to plug a problem that's arisen. With autonomy, we've got the opportunity actually to create a product that works for something that's going to impact us in the future. And the UK government's taken a really responsible role here. The autonomous vehicles bill that's currently going through Parliament is really a highly responsible approach to setting out the definitions of the relevant actors, the roles and expectations of all the players in the ecosystem. And there's huge value there in Aon supporting the development of insurance solutions. So how we can work together with clients and regulators to bring insurance markets together to create the products that will help that scale. Because I guess one of the challenges for autonomy has been there's so much skepticism around it. People have been sort of promised this false dawn that it's just over the horizon, but actually it's still faces real challenges to get that confidence and public adoption. We know there are great successes. There's companies like Oxa out there that are looking to develop, really exciting on-road and off-road technology to support the ecosystem. Waymo is still making success of it in the US. So we think it's a really exciting area, but it needs support.
Yeah, it's funny you should mention about perceptions, Marc. I was at an event last week, a networking event on Thursday night, and I was telling people what I did, and we talked about mobility, and this was a sample size of about 10, 12 people. And it was really interesting, the cross-section from the gentleman who said, well, my daughter will never need to learn to drive, and she was 12. So there's a perception that autonomous vehicles will be a meaningful thing in and around London within 5 years, through to somebody else who was, I'm not going to trust that technology. I've got to have a steering wheel that leaves me in control, and everything in between. So the cross-section of perceptions is vast. And again, as an industry, with everything from insurance to manufacturers through to technology providers, software providers, we really need to work together to make sure that we are communicating effectively to businesses and consumers alike.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, personally, I find that 5 years is very, very ambitious. I went to an event last week and that was talking a lot about autonomy and risk and things like the government. They're too scared to even say within 50 years because no one really knows. I think it's still really in its infancy. And I think risk is just one massive part of it as well.
Yeah, I think there's been great strides in the technology. I think it's advanced very significantly in the last probably 3 years. They're reaching the cusp of some really interesting breakthroughs. But I think, ultimately adoption comes down to that trust in the technology and understanding safety. So businesses are thinking about how they can sort of promote and educate to show the benefits of this technology without overstepping and going too far. So I think it's right to take that responsible, cautious approach, but I think there is still some way to go. But again, I think by using our power as professional services advisors, bringing the industry together, hopefully we can bring that sort of wide-scale adoption a lot closer than it otherwise would be.
I think this kind of draws us nicely into how you can advise people on how to navigate insurance. We were saying people aren't really sure on the future. The future isn't very predictable in mobility. Anything can happen. But how would you advise that the businesses within mobility or in general can navigate insurance now?
Yeah, sure, Grace. I mean, I think those of us in the industry know that it can be confusing, it's perplexing to try and navigate insurance companies, products, advisory services, the difference between insurers, brokers, consultants, and I guess there's a reason why one of the most famous brands is Confused.com. So as an industry, we need a much more joined-up approach, which is easier touch points, services aligned to the way modern tech enable businesses functions. And I think if we looked at this in sort of two buckets, the first one is how we view traditional products that have been around and how we use those traditional products in a different way. So a great example of that would be embedded insurance products. It's not a new concept, but it's definitely resurgent for car manufacturers, truck manufacturers and new businesses that need to establish product certainty, confidence, that trust and safety to get scale. And that's definitely an area you will hear more about from Curtis Scott, our head of future mobility at Move. And then you've got areas which I'd say are still in the emerging stage because the risk is still not known in its fullest sense. So that could be cyber, for example. Cyber risk is not new. It's growing exponentially. It clearly will be huge in the mobility sector across every type of firm. Intellectual property, everybody in this room is creating intellectual property. How do you protect that? How do you ensure it doesn't get stolen? How can you potentially finance off the back of your intangible assets? And then I think actually also, how do we start aligning what were traditionally health and benefits products and insurance products and it just become a much more rounded product? And I think that's the approach and that's how we're helping our clients navigate the insurance landscape.
Yeah, interesting. I just wanted to go back to you talking about cyber risk. I was reading in the news recently that obviously in the US, their autonomous vehicle market arguably is more advanced as it is in the UK.
Yeah.
And I read in the news recently that the Biden administration has launched an investigation into Chinese imported EVs and, the safety from the risk of data that is within them. Is there anything that you guys wanted to talk to about that?
Well, I think Martyn perhaps can come back to sort of, I guess, more specifics around sort of cyber insurance and the stress testing that goes on in and around that. I mean, I think we know that connected vehicles create that risk. And I think we also know that OEMs are looking at many different ways of monetizing that connectivity, which will introduce new risks and new complexity. So I think, they're definitely well understood risks from our point of view. But I think to Martyn's point, the insurance markets are starting to have to grapple with different use cases for that data and try and think ahead to make sure that it really can understand the true extent of the exposures. So I'll let Martyn talk about how we help clients from a cyber perspective, but we can advise across the organisation to support, understanding their use cases and where insurance can fit in.
Yeah, thanks, Marc. I mean, I'll be really quick, Grace. I mean, we adopt an approach called the cyber loop. We can help companies no matter where they are on that cyber loop, and that's really three main areas, which is mitigation and protection of the business, which will be number one. If you so wish to protect your balance sheet, the transfer of risk, so taking out cyber insurance, and then lastly, and I think this is true to say, it is a when, not an if anymore. You will be subject to a cyber attack. It is how do you recover from that event and ensure that the business comes back stronger and the brand and the reputation is not damaged from a consumer or a business perspective.
Yeah, so more of a holistic approach, not just if this happens, it's all
Yeah.
gonna. Yeah. And so did you want to move on to the availability and use of data as well?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting area because, the mobility space is probably at the forefront of this technology advancement, which is really bringing the possibility of much more reliable, much more credible data. And insurance really isn't used to that, right? So insurance companies are used to having 50 years of very static data, which it then tries to predict the future on. And that means that some of those models are quite out of date or don't necessarily fit the use cases for mobility businesses. So we're super excited by the role that data has in terms of helping to turn that insight into actions to drive better decisions around risk allocation and cost improvement. So if we take something like micro-mobility, that can understand how, their riders are behaving. So not just sort of where and when they're going, but the sort of challenges and obstacles that they're coming up to as they go through. And that then helps the operators to predict and educate in terms of use case. From app-enabled mobility, we're seeing a lot around driver behaviour and routing, and that's something we're going to talk a lot about as it moves this year. Geospatial models are really interesting because they provide the benefit of better understanding the risks that can impact on infrastructure. That could be risks from climate, could be weather-related events, but also geospatial models now informing risk behaviour for driving as well, and that's super interesting. So I think, for us, data is a huge area. We know that particularly in the AV space, data is really important. So part of the UK government's approach to autonomy has been about the importance of sharing data and having responsibility for data. And I think that really helps in the education piece. It helps to educate the public, but it also helps the insurance market. So we can use data in different ways to understand what the risk exposures are and then design the products for it. So for us, it's a super interesting area. I think it affects every business, and the opportunity to work with people around data is very exciting.
Yeah, thank you for that, Marc. We were talking about, the data that we do have and how that fits into insurance and, how it can inform insurance. But also, I want to talk about new risk concepts, which you mentioned previously. And Martyn, I know this is something that you wanted to talk about and how new risk concepts in the mobility sector and how that's sort of panning out.
Yeah, thanks, Grace. I think by definition, the mobility sector is about agility, technology, pace, and innovation in this space is about increasing that agility, using the technology, using the data, and fundamentally making mobility a frictionless experience. And I think, we've mentioned before, we need to think about insurance differently. And one of the things that are often on my mind is how do we need to insure, what do we need to insure, and why and when? And one of the questions that I think we should often be asking ourselves is, should we be insuring the asset, the car, the bike, the scooter, or should we be insuring the person?
Yeah.
Now, traditionally, we've insured the asset and then named the person with the asset. But it could be different. And is there a world where actually the insurance is portable? So I, as an individual, have insurance, and whether I'm on a scooter, an e-bike, a car, to a degree, I can pass seamlessly between them because that clearly would be a panacea for most mobility operations per city. But then I think back to Denmark, and I mentioned Denmark because my wife is Danish and my family is Danish, and I've been going there for years now. And in Denmark, the asset, the car is insured. So every time I've been there, I've just been able to jump into my mother-in-law's car, my brother-in-law's car, and not really think much about it, which has been hugely beneficial. But then I think about when they come to the UK, I'm busy phoning up a call centre, and then I'm spending £15, £25 to get someone added to my car for 2 days. So I do think there's a way we need to change. We need to have more confidence in the data sets, and we need to think about how we enable this bigger shift to sharing and to the wider mobility economy. And it sort of leads me on, I'm just thinking about Marc, how do you see the progress today? Because I talk about confidence and that trust and safety, but how do you think things are going in terms of giving people and businesses confidence?
Yeah, well, I think that's the opportunity really for us as professional advisors, but also the industry. I think about the things we've just talked about today, and I think that confidence comes from having experts and advisors that can help interpret that information and turn it into something that means something. So how can we turn that data into something that's meaningful so that organisations can do something with it, which either helps them to save money or helps them to use their capital in a different way? So if I think about it in the context of new energy vehicles, data can be used to show that perhaps what people think about the risk of fire to batteries or hydrogen units is not as great as they think. And actually, the insurance for those products should be affordable. If I think about AVs, I think about, how does an autonomous vehicle reduce the frequency of accidents, given that most car accidents are caused by humans. 94% of accidents are caused by humans. So there's a huge opportunity there to reduce severity. That's got a safety impact, but also it should reduce the cost of insurance. And then I think about the broader mobility sector and think about how data can be used to inform better operational efficiency, really improve the unit economics of the operating model. And I think Aon's got a really exciting role to play in that. We love working with clients in this space. It's one of the reasons why we're passionate about it and why we've looked to sponsor Move and join in this great conversation.
Yeah, I agree. I think these conversations, they're really interesting conversations and they're going to be spoken about a lot at Move. And I wanted to ask you, what is Aon going to be bringing to Move this year? How's it going to be different from last year? And how's it going to be following on this conversation that we've been having today?
Yeah, thanks, Grace. I think we'll close on us with, we are really excited about being part of the conversation at Move 2024. We'll be leading with innovation and how we're going to bring capital to new products and ideas. And we'll be hosting panels on data, raising capital and infrastructure, really bringing to life how we serve in the mobility ecosystem to meet the challenges and unlock growth. I think we've referenced it previously, Gillian Slyfield's challenge in 2023, and I'm delighted that Curtis Scott, our Exec Vice President of Future Mobility and Digital Economy, will be bringing you more news on how Aon has actually invested in these areas in 2023 and 2024 to deliver for clients in this year's keynote speech. We look forward to welcoming all the attendees to our stand again. Everybody is welcome, and we look forward to meeting.
Great. Well, I definitely think that it's going to be a really interesting topic to follow and it's going to be interesting conversations to follow on at Move. And I look forward to talking to you guys more about it at Move. Thank you so much for joining with me today. I will catch up with you there at the event and I'll see you there.
Great. Thank you.